Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. I love talking to authors because they have the courage and they have the stories and the lessons that they want to share with the many. Ultimately, putting it down into a book and changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And so, if you're out there and you want to write a book, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. We can help you out with wherever you're at in the process. And also, if you have a book that's already done, you want to generate leads with it and grow your business, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. Now, this one is going to be an exciting podcast for you guys out there because I just love seeing it from the other side, learning from people who are basically behind the curtain, if you will. And there's people like, or there's books like when it comes to Catch Me If You Can, turned into a movie. It's just I'm fascinated with the good guys and the bad guys in the battle that's happening there. And if you're out there and you are interested in the topic of maybe criminal tax secrets, this podcast is for you. The book we're talking about, Criminal Tax Secrets: What Every Defense Attorney Should Know, an insider's guide to evaluating every stage of a criminal tax investigation. This is going to be interesting because the bio of this guy is extensive, but let me just read it off for you. Robert Nordlander is a speaker, podcast host, CPA, and author of Criminal Tax Secrets. He spent over 20 years as a special agent with the IRS criminal investigation, chasing tax evaders and money launderers around the globe. Currently, he is the principal member of Nordlander CPA, PLLC, a boutique forensic accounting and tax resolution firm. As a special agent, he investigated tax and white-collar crimes that were profiled in the New York Times, PBS, NBC, and various magazines. As part of his duties, he taught continuing education to other federal employees, including representing the United States in training law enforcement, in forensic accounting, and anti-money laundering investigations. He currently is the host of the Fraud Fighter podcast, which is focused on forensic accounting and anti-fraud, anti-money laundering industry, and the Criminal Tax Files, which is focused on criminal tax matters. Good Lord, this is going to be wild. It's an honor to have you here, Robert Nordlander. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mike.
Well, you stipulate right in the book, hey, you are not a lawyer. This is not advice, but you were able to, I think the way you put it, you are able to see what goes on. And therefore, if people ask you advice, you are now able to share it with people. So you're not a lawyer. And so I thought that was fascinating. First line in the book, awesome way to put it. But can you give us the reason why you actually sat down and wrote this book, and maybe your background? Please dive into the journey that got you here.
Well, growing up as a teenager, I watched a lot of Miami Vice, SWAT, Chips. That kind of dates me a little bit, right? And I've always had a love for law enforcement. I wanted to be that guy. And my father was an accountant and a CPA, and he said, "Well, you can get a CPA license and accounting degree, you can go anywhere around the world and get a job." And I knew that the FBI hired a lot of accountants to be special agents. Now, when you hear the word special agent, most people don't know what it means. When you hear FBI special agent, Secret Service special agent, Homeland Security special agent, it just means law enforcement. They are law enforcement individuals. They have the abilities to have arrests, search and seizure warrants. They carry guns and handcuffs and that type of thing. I wanted to be an FBI special agent, but I was too young when I got out. Started going to public accounting, and I had a love for law enforcement. Became a reserve deputy sheriff, so I was a white collar guy during the day and a crime fighter on the weekends. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And um, later on, I decided to go into federal law enforcement. So I was looking at federal law enforcement jobs, FBI, Secret Service, DEA, that type of thing. Well, IRS showed up. I was a CPA for years, didn't even know the IRS had a section that was law enforcement. There are accounting nerds with guns, is what they are. It was a perfect marriage between my CPA license and law enforcement. So I joined the IRS criminal investigations, and there is about 2,000 of them out of about 90,000 at the time that carry guns, and most people don't know about them. You probably know about Al Capone, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how he was caught. That was IRS. Okay. It's something lately in the papers or news in the last year or so is Hunter Biden about his tax problems and his tax evasion and that type of thing, the allegations of it. That's something that I did for a living. So
Wow.
we would use the tax code and follow the money. Where did the money come from? Where did the money go to? And prepare a report, do interviews, search warrants, seizure warrants, all that type of stuff. Cryptocurrency. I was a subject matter expert for a little while on cryptocurrency when it first came out. And so that's what I did. But when I was a special agent with the IRS, many times, oh, always, I was on the side of the table with the prosecutor, the federal prosecutor, and myself. So I was the accounting nerd, the guy who did the interviews, the guy who traced the money. I know where the money came from, where it went to, how many girlfriends this person had, how much money they spent on cars and houses and vacations. I knew everything about these people, right? But across the table would be the defense attorney and the defendant. And they didn't have anybody in the room, frankly, that had my expertise because I knew where the money went to for many, many years and where it came from. So when I decided to leave and retire at 50 years old with the IRS, the question I had is what can I do to teach defense attorneys what they need to know, what I know on this side of the table? Because I didn't meet anybody on that side of the table. There was nobody with my expertise that I met. And I didn't see any books out there that even discuss this stuff. And so I decided to just go ahead and write a book. Now, I wrote a book for the purposes, and you know this too, Mike, is that books make you an author and a subject matter expert. You may not even know what you're doing half the time, but you write a book, people automatically assume that you know what you're talking about, right?
Bingo. Yeah.
My audience for the book was defense attorneys, and defense attorneys know the law. They need to know the law. And so whenever I write a book, I have to cite it. I have to put footnotes. So if I say this happens or this is IRS policy or whatever happens, I have to put in the book the footnotes because no one's going to trust just me saying it. And they shouldn't. They should verify what I have to say as well. So I wrote the book, and I think it's really the only book out there that discusses how IRS determines who should be prosecuted, how they should be prosecuted, how they figure it all out. Okay, every single stage of the investigation, and I use this as a marketing tool for my services because you know as well as I do that when people say, "Oh, you wrote a book," yeah, can you talk to my client? We're having a problem here. We'll discuss it. I sit down with the client, I sit down with the defense attorney, and I can say, "Oh, your problem's in chapter 7. Here's a signed copy of my book." Automatically you're hired, right? Because you're no longer just a CPA. Now you're a guy who's been there and you can prove it. Me just saying that what I did is one thing, but me putting on a piece of paper and having it really be scrutinized by the public or defense attorneys, or even on the witness stand too, because if I'm on the witness stand, that book can be used against me in some ways if it's wrong. Is my point. So because I'm in court sometimes, it's a double-edged sword. So that's the kind of reason why I wrote the book. It was just to get it out there. I thought it was a need, but also the byproduct of it is that now I'm considered an expert in the field, and I speak nationally across on stages for return preparers and CPAs and attorneys and that type of thing about IRS and criminal tax because everybody's always interested about when does a civil audit become a prison term, So that's the reason why I wrote it.
Man, I'm fascinated with this. So you bring up Al Capone. Now, the reason why they went after him for tax evasion is because they couldn't get him on anything else, I think. And that's the story from what I gathered. But it makes
That's
me think,
correct. They,
yeah,
they couldn't get him on the murder side, but they could get him on he didn't pay taxes. Yep.
bingo, right? And so that's provable in court. Now, I'm always curious about how these cases even rise to the surface to become criminal investigations. All right. So I live
Hmm.
in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There's a house that's probably 20 minutes away from me. It's the biggest house in Pennsylvania. And it's
Hmm.
unbelievable. And it's like it doesn't belong in Pennsylvania. It's that big. And I remember
Hmm.
hearing stories about the person who actually bought that and built it. And the story is, and this is in the newspapers, which I don't believe, but IRS agents were flying over the house one day. They looked down and they said, wow, that's a really big house. Let's look into this person and see how they made their money. And then that's how it started, which I don't believe one bit. It makes me think of the reason why these tax investigations start is from one, a tip, maybe a bad blood, an enemy, somebody who has a connection with the IRS to say, hey, might as well look at this person. Or the act of potentially a jump in income or a drop in income that seems suspicious, that sets off some type of trigger. So my question to you is, how do these investigations usually start?
Well, I'm gonna bust your bubble. Neither one. The way you
Oh
just said,
shit.
way you
Sorry.
described it. Yeah, neither one.
Wow. Okay. I have no clue,
Okay,
man.
here's the kicker. Special agents like myself, when I was working there for about 20 years, are hired, and one of the job descriptions is find your own cases. The IRS is not going to spoon feed them cases. You have to go find them. I like to find my own cases because if you find a case that you like and you really are into it, you probably will work it and be excited about it, showing up every single day to do the job, right? If someone just hands you a case and say, work it, well, you got that type of attitude, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I agree
I
with that.
almost always I found my cases. And I would find them similar to what you're talking about, but not necessarily like that. I've had a case where very similar to what you're talking about. I was looking in a neighborhood I was living in Birmingham, Alabama, and I was looking at houses since I knew houses were, it's a $200,000 house, $200,000 house. Oh, it's a $500,000 house, $200,000. So why is a $500,000 house in a $200,000 neighborhood? Now, this was almost 20 years ago, so bear with me. So, in Alabama, that would be 20 years ago, that'd be a decent house. Uh, so what I did is I think that's weird. No one buys a house and puts a house in a neighborhood that overvalues the neighborhood, right? That means money comes easy to this person. Why is that? Well, I pulled the tax return and found out that he actually was a bookie and he was reporting, I'll make something up, like $10,000 a year, right? So he's living in a $500,000 house making 10,000. No one lives in a $500,000 house making $10,000 a year. This is called a clue, right? And so, as an IRS agent, I would start looking into there's probably something here. I've done that. I've also had a situation where I read the newspaper article, and there was a guy that was an ultra marathon runner. He actually wrote a book about this, and there's some documentaries about it. I found it in the either newspaper or TV show, either one. He was actually promoting his movie, and I pulled his tax return, and it didn't jive to what I thought it should jive with, and so we opened an investigation. Ultimately, ended up being a bank fraud investigation, and it went to trial. So that's another reason how I found the case. I also found a case where I was picking all the $1 million houses over that were purchased in the last couple of years in various counties, because $1 million house, let's say 20 years ago, was pretty expensive. And it's all relative to your neighborhood, of course, but $1 million house is pretty expensive in where we're at. And so anybody who didn't file a tax return or had very low income, I just sorted from lowest to highest, all their income. So I got a list of all the houses, had someone pull all the tax returns based upon that, on the people who live there. If a person lives in $1 million house and makes $1 million a year, there's nothing there, right? But if someone hasn't filed a tax return and lives in $1 million house, it's called a clue. Someone probably has to have some type of income. So I did that and got a great case off of that one. So we would look for these types of things. Um, and there are times where I did some research, and I'll just give you an example. It's not uncommon. You know, the earned income tax credit is. The earned income tax credit is when someone is so poor that the government gives them money, and it's a tax credit on a tax return. People get large refunds off of it. Well, if someone's living in the most expensive neighborhood in the county or in the city, but yet is earning that tax credit, that would be called a clue. And then you would look into it to see whether or not it's legitimate or not. So we had to find our own cases. Sometimes it was handed to us, but most of the time it was not a tip, actually. It was
Wow.
just either there's some type of database mining going on in the IRS, or it's just an agent who is in need by the federal prosecutor. Can you help me do this? Or are we just fighting on our own? I've actually had a case where there was a situation where we had an investigation on a dead kid, a dead child, who was like 12 or 13 years old that was missing, and we used tax in order to go after that person. It's called the case of Erica Parsons. And it's a very, very sad case. But at the end of the day, forensic accounting was used to help recover a body at the end of the day. So, but it was there's so many different ways we can find cases. Is my point. So
Do you believe
it
and
was a very
maybe
good career. Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you believe that many investigations arise from political beliefs? Does that happen? Now, we've
No.
heard about the 80,000 IRS agents that were recently hired by the
Mhm.
Biden administration. And many people that I've talked to believe that it's a political move. It's really to go after the enemies. So is that true? Is that possible? What do you say?
When I was with the IRS, there was no political issues whatsoever. I couldn't even tell you who was Republican, who's Democrat when we investigated. The question is, did you earn the money and did you pay tax on it? That's what it comes down to. Uh, it is what it is. Now, in the upper echelons, is there some, sharp elbows way, way on up there? The appointed individuals, probably. But it never filtered down. I've never got a phone call saying work this person because they're a Democrat or they're, whatever else it is. That's not how it works at the IRS. Uh, Now, that being said, there was the Lois Lerner fiasco about 20 years ago or so. That was crazy. Um, you know, it, the IRS does have its own problems, don't get me wrong. But in general, it's not a political entity whatsoever. Those 80,000 employees, I don't think people understand this. Is that there's a return on investment with the IRS. Either we don't like them because customer service stinks, and it does, okay? The tax code stinks, and it does. Well, that's Congress's problem. Congress creates this animal and tells the IRS to go enforce it, and the IRS has to go enforce it. And then Congress gives the IRS the ability to make its own regulations to enforce it, which makes it even worse, right? Because they have nobody really to be accountable to for the most part. Um, it is what it is, okay? Uh, but when this stuff happens and there's an investigations, it's not really a political issue. So there's 80,000. My point is the 80,000 have to be hired, and the reason is because I think like half of the IRS employees can retire within a couple of years. So if they don't backfill the stuff, there's gonna be zero enforcement,
Got
and
it.
that becomes an issue. And I'm not the biggest fan of the IRS because I have to deal with them on the civil side too. I understand what they can and cannot do, um, but if you don't backfill it, then pretty soon it's going to collapse. So they have to hire. And when they say 80,000, they're talking about 80,000 over the next 10 years, not next week. It's impossible to hire that many people next week. They were 80,000 armed agents. Not even close. The IRS maybe has 2,000 special agents that are armed. They don't have the capability to hire and train these people to put them on the streets, 80,000. They're lucky, honestly, to get probably 200, 300 a year trained
Wow.
to do this. Yes, because it's 6 months of training. It's 6 months in the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center outside of Brunswick, Georgia, where the Secret Service and the Homeland Security, everybody else gets trained too. It's 6 months out there, and all the classes are limited, I think 25, 24 students. So if you've got 4 or 5 classes going on per at any given time, it's 100. It's just it's a lot of people you got to go through. It's just not going to work.
Hmm.
It's just not going to work. So when I hear these numbers, it's not economically feasible
Got
to
it.
do that
Okay.
stuff.
So that might,
It's a lot of blowing smoke, making stuff up.
yeah, I don't believe pretty much anything in the news anymore. So I'm like, how much is that real? It's just, so,
No,
uh,
I understand.
yeah. So, I guess my next question is, how does it all begin? And you have a great book here. It outlines pretty much the steps to take if you're a defense attorney. But what does it look like for the average listener out there who's listening to this podcast? They're not an attorney, but they have businesses. So what does it look like to for the person that gets the investigation? I would assume when you pull those tax returns that you would say, well, who filed their taxes? Oh, let's go talk to the accountant, right? Let's look at the books. That would be step one,
Hmm.
in my opinion. Is that the step? And then do you ever even meet the client until it goes to court? Because I was even talking to a few accountants and they say if they get an audit, their client never meets the IRS agent until it gets to an insane point, right? So what does that process look like?
All right, there are two different animals you're dealing with. One's a civil issue and one's a criminal issue. A civil issue is where the IRS says, "Do you have a receipt for that? Yes or no?" And they go through the books. Do you have a document for this? What's that? And if you don't have a receipt, they'll just screw you over, right? That's a civil audit. That's everybody understands that. The other side of the coin is a criminal investigation. Criminal investigation is a totally different animal, okay? Because the burden of proof is now on the government to do whatever, and that's when we can force people to be to testify. You are right. When we do an investigation, it's called a sniff test. We sniff it out. Is this worthy of investigating? Then we have our manager approve it. Yes, go forward with this. And so there's always some type of level of management. There's no rogue agents out there. Okay. There's always some level out there of approval to be done to open up a case. When we do a case, um, one of the first steps we'll do is that more than likely we'll interview the subject. Do you have a reason for all this? And they may have inherited a lot of money. Maybe they inherited a lot of money from their grandma. And it's not on the tax return because that's not taxable. And case closed, nothing there. I spent what, a week or two on this case and we're done.
But now, how does
Uh,
that happen?
so
Is there a letter? Is there somebody who shows up at the door with a gun? Like, what does that look like?
yep. Typically, what you do is we do a cold call. We get somebody, 8 o'clock in the morning, knock on the door and say, "Hey, I need to speak to you for a second before you go to work."
Got it.
Or you don't want to do it 2 o'clock in the morning. It's crazy, right? You get shot at. But you try to get someone a cold call, what you're doing a cold call, and you'll do that. The return preparer, same way, you probably do a cold call. But in that situation, hey, get the books and records. We need to talk, and we'll talk in a week or whatever, 2 weeks or whatever else it is, because no one's got the books and records right there when you knock on the door. It's just not going to happen. But when you interview the subject, it's almost always a cold call because I want the unrehearsed truth. That's what I want.
Got
If
it.
people know I'm coming, they're going to have some answers. I want the unrehearsed answer
And what's
when
your
I talk to them.
recommendation? I guess since you're not licensed by the state, you can actually give your recommendation. But an individual who has nothing to hide, is it just best to just open up and just say, "Hey, this is everything. Let me show you. Hey,
Oh,
come
no,
on
no,
in."
no, 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 no. If you ever get an IRS special agent knock on your door, flashing the badge, and says I'm a special agent, the answer is talk to my attorney, go get an attorney. Don't, you can do nothing but screw yourself over by talking to agents, honestly.
Got it.
Um, I was nice, and for the most part, the fact of the matter is, Mike, is that in white collar tax investigations, frankly, it's irrelevant what the defendant says. Because if the case isn't paying out, if I can't prove my case without your testimony, I really don't have a case. Because if you're living in $1 million house claiming $10,000 a year, if I can't prove this case, I don't care if you confess or not. I really don't have a case, right? It's either going to be a slam dunk or it's not. So frankly, I would always tell my defendants, "Hey, I need to speak to you, but if you're thinking about lying to me, please shut up because I don't want to write a 5 page, you know, 100 page memorandum of what you said of nothing but lies. You're wasting my time." If you want to tell me the truth, that's fine. We'll tell the truth. I'll be happy to. But if you're going to lie, shut up. I don't want to listen to you. I'm not going to write a bunch of garbage down, and then I'm not going to use it against you anyway. So if I have to use it against you, I don't have a case. So either tell me the truth or shut up.
Got it.
And some
So
people, in a sense, I'm kind of pushing them to not talk to me.
yeah, it sounds like it. You're almost giving advice to hey, listen, man, I want to make it's not like you're out to get them, right? You're just doing your job to a
No,
point.
no,
But
I'm
I
just doing my
maybe
job.
maybe there are IRS agents that have gone rogue internally, right? Where they're like, I really want to get this person. Oh, I looked at his politics. I don't like
Oh,
him, right?
yeah. Yeah, they do that, but the problem is it's just immaturity. They haven't thought this whole thing through. If you have to have the defendant to lie to you, I mean, if you have to get them to do that in order to get a case, you don't have a case. You really don't because the numbers don't lie.
Got it.
Either you made the money or you didn't. It's pretty simple. In IRS, when it comes to evaluating cases, if you commit tax evasion of $1, it's still a felony. Okay? How many people have probably, fudged a little bit here, fudged a little bit there, a couple $100 here? Is that a felony? Yes. Is it worth anybody's time? No, it's not. So when we do our cases, we're not looking at the $10 issues. We're not looking at, and everybody should file an accurate tax return. Don't get me wrong. Okay. Um, but when IRS is looking at it from a criminal standpoint, they're looking at 100,000 plus probably loss. That means you have to have probably around $500,000, $300,000 of unreported income, over a multi-year period of time. So this is not like It's either there or there. It's either there or it's not. Those types of investigations.
Got it. That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard that it's definitely an investment, and it's got to be worth it to, like you said,
Hmm.
if you get it, I always ask people like, oh, people who are always mad about Trump not paying tax or whatever. I'm like, I ask them, if you got $100 from your grandma, and it's a cash, do you put that on the tax return? And they always like freeze with like deer in the headlights. I'm like, well, you just,
Well, you don't have to if it's a gift.
oh, if it's a ten thousand
But yeah,
dollars
but
or more, right?
whatever.
So
Yeah, it's a gift. The gift, no problem. But let me give an example. Let's assume that you went out there and you sold your lawnmower for $100.
ah,
Now, that would be considered you gotta have income on it. I mean, that's just
there you
it's just
go.
one of those deals, right?
Yep.
Uh,
If it
that
if you
type of stuff, it happens.
So basically, what you're saying is that there's leeway if it's a certain
Hmm.
amount, but it's also a business decision. Somebody in the higher up, like you said, the people that are running these have to make sense of it, and it has to be worth their time because it's going to go for a long time. These are not done. These are not started in closed cases within a weekend, right? These go on potentially for years.
No,
Is
no,
that
no,
right?
no, no. On average, these types of cases will last 18 months. And it's
18
18
months.
months long, and they're looking at 4 or 5 year period of time. They're not looking at 1 year. It's 4 or 5 years. So they're looking at someone's lifestyle for a couple of years, number one. Number two is the amount has to be higher. And the reason is because it's simple. You have to have an investment, true. But think about this from this standpoint. The IRS is in the business of putting the fear of God in you. When they're going to do a criminal investigation, and they want to sit there and do a press release that says Joe the plumber got convicted of tax evasion, is going to prison for 18 months because he unreported, a $500,000 in income and lives in this fancy house. That lets every entrepreneur going, by golly, that's right. He shouldn't be, I can't do that. He shouldn't be able to do that. He should be going to prison for it, right?
Yeah.
But there is something called the sentencing guidelines. It's a book made by the federal government that the federal judges take into consideration. And in those guidelines, it gives you an idea, it gives a judge an idea of where this person should land in prison. So if someone has $100,000 loss, right, they probably will get some type of jail time. It makes sense. Someone who has a $5 million defraud of the government versus 100,000 should probably spend more time with $5 million than 100,000, right? This makes perfect sense. When it gets to the point where there's no prison time, you have house arrest. What kind of press release do you want to have is, oh, person was found guilty, sentenced to nothing, probation.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's just not what the type of press release you want in life. You want the 3 year, 5 year, 10 year, whatever, the really stick it to them, right? So if you're going to do a press release, make it a good one. Well, if you're going to make it a good one, you got to have a high enough loss. Now the caveat is this: if it's the mayor, right, and they took a bribe for, let's say, $30,000, and the IRS steps in and goes, well, it's income, even though we can't prove it's a bribe. You didn't pay tax on it. We're gonna charge you for this. They still can do that for because the person was in a position of trust. So if someone's in a position of trust, like the mayor or congressman and that type of stuff, they probably will lower the limits to prove a point because you got to root people out like that. But for Joe the plumber and Mike the podcaster and whoever else it is, you got to have a substantial amount of money before it becomes a criminal issue. And there's only so many special agents out there too, so you got to pick and choose. You
Yeah.
know.
That brings me to my next question. I'm glad you bring that up. The difference between civil and criminal. What has to happen for it to transfer over to the criminal? My my assumption is people need to be hurt, and number two needs to be a certain threshold of money. What is it?
It's true. It's a I look at it this way: is 56 going in the 55-mile-an-hour zone? Do you deserve a ticket? Yes, you deserve a ticket. 56 and 55. Does anybody give it? No, because everybody does it, right? When it goes from a civil issue to a criminal issue, it's I describe it this way. It's like a guy going 85 in a 55, weaving in and out of traffic, throwing everybody the middle finger and throwing beer cans out the window. That person has to be stopped, right? So, from a criminal standpoint, these are individuals who just keep going on and on and on, and it's so big of a mess that they deserve prison time. And there's it's not a mistake. This is not you going to your CPA and forgetting that you had a couple dollars on some interest income on your bank account, right? That's not what this is. These are people that intentionally are hiding money. They're putting money in a different bank account and not telling their return preparer about it. They are giving false documents to a return preparer. They are not reporting their side business that makes them a lot of money. Or they got cryptocurrency that they sold and put their proceeds into Switzerland and decided not to tell the IRS about it. This is not a simple mistake. This is actively what they call criminal intent, called willfulness. And so you have to prove willfulness typically by what we call circumstantial evidence. Um, you have any kids, Mike?
No,
No kids? All right.
no.
Well, if you have a kid and you say, little Johnny, don't eat the cookie, right? And you walk outside out of the room in the hallway and you turn around, look around the corner and you see little Johnny eat the cookie. You say, Johnny, did you eat the cookie? He goes, no, I didn't. Well, it's called direct evidence. You know Johnny ate the cookie, right? Circumstantial evidence is when you say, Johnny, don't eat the cookie, and then you leave the room. You don't see him do it, but you can hear him move the chair across the floor, open up the canister, open up the wrapper. He's going, good. And you come back in and say, Johnny, did you eat the cookie? And he's got chocolate all over his mouth. He goes, no. Well, you know Johnny ate the cookie, even though you didn't see him do it, right? Because the whole picture shows that this person is eating a cookie. Same thing with criminal intent. The whole picture shows that this person intentionally wanted to defraud the IRS. They hid things. They put in girlfriends' names. They didn't report everything. They didn't tell the return preparer everything. They lied to the investigator when they were caught. You see what I'm talking about. There's a whole picture. They did it over a multi-year period of time. They did it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. When you start putting all that in front of a jury, they're going to believe that this was not an honest mistake. This was intent, criminal intent. And that's what the IRS goes after, those individuals who have criminal intent. The person going 85 in a 55 mile an hour zone, throwing beer cans, weaving out of traffic, that's the person they're going to go after.
Now, I would assume you probably worked on some big cases that you might be able to mention, might not be able to. I'd love to talk about that in a bit. But when it comes to big names, let's just say there's somebody that's in your sphere that is doing really big moves, and they get under investigation, right?
Mhm.
Is there some type of sphere of influence, or maybe because it's like a hot button, they start to look at everyone else in that world? Is that like a spider web? Like, oh wow, if this person's potentially up to something, let's just see who he's doing business with. And the reason why I bring that up is because I look at, certain people that I follow on social media, and maybe I follow them for 15, 20 years, and all of a sudden I see some type of issue that they run into with the government. And I'm like, uh-oh, that means maybe some people who've worked with them might be popping up on radar. So is that even a possibility, or does that happen?
It does happen. It depends on the level that the person's entwined with the other people. I'll give an example. It's not uncommon in a drug case where you'll get the low level guy, right? You bust him for the drugs, you flip him onto somebody bigger and flip him on somebody bigger. You just
Yeah.
go up the chain, right? That's it's like that. Sometimes it can be the same way in a tax investigation if you know that this person right here is a low level person, but you're really going for the big tuna, right? The big fish. I'll give an example. I had a case, an international case, where there was a very rich guy, and there's some people around him that were more or less helping him evade taxes, right? Well, the person I was looking at wasn't really the smart one. He was hiring somebody else to help him evade taxes. Well, I got a question. Do I go after the defendant who I thought is guilty, or I really go after the person who's helping him, right? I probably would do both, but the person who's helping him is probably helping other people as well. So if I get the helper, he's probably helping a lot of rich guys evade taxes, not just the guy I'm looking at. So I would expand it to include the helper. And if I
Mm.
can, I'd use my defendant to get the helper because I know the helper is really the one that causes is causing a lot of problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
No, sort of. No, but
Yeah.
that's kind of because let's just face it. When it comes to these large, we say large, multi-million dollar tax evasion schemes, these rich people who get in the middle of the stuff didn't create this. They were sold on the idea of here's what you need to do. And so you want to go what we call the promoters. The IRSCI would go after the promoters because they're the ones that are the bad apples, leading the greedy rich guy astray by buying into their program to evade taxes. That's kind of usually how it goes. You can go after the rich guy, but typically they're not sitting around trying to figure out how to evade taxes. They're probably getting some help.
Now,
So
you did
that's
bring
how it
up,
works.
by the way, in my circles, there's a lot of talk about crypto and Bitcoin and is it
Hmm.
good? Is it bad? Is it, going to be able to be the way of the future? Um, and you said you were a subject expert when it comes to crypto early on. Now, what are your
Correct.
beliefs on crypto? I think it's a way for people to, you could say, hide money because it's a whole new currency and it's easy to basically, put somewhere that it's a new, I mean, there's new coins being created every single day. So I look at it that
Right.
way, but also the fact that it's so speculative that it's going up and down on a minute by minute basis, I think it's very tough to calculate. So, what are your thoughts on crypto and buying crypto? Does that start to raise, I guess, some red flags in your name?
When it comes to crypto, I'm not against it, but I'm not for it either, honestly. Is it a medium of exchange? Yes. Very speculative? Yes. Is it an investment? I would say no, but some people have made millions of dollars just putting it into it, right? It's but there's so many coins out there, you don't know what's going to be the next biggest best thing. So I've investigated people who dealt with crypto because it's anonymous, right? It's pseudo anonymous is what we call it. Um, you can find out people who own the crypto. You have to do some, more a little more digging to do so. I'm just not a biggest fan of it. There's some issues, especially with Bitcoin. I know, especially with I don't want to. It's you got to wait 10 minutes or 12 minutes in order to make sure it goes through the process, and and the blockchain analysis. And there's faster ones with I think Ethereum and that type of stuff. But until I can go to the grocery store and start buying this stuff, frankly, no. And then
Yeah,
there's a tax angle on it because every time you sell it, it's a taxable event. Which, good heavens, how are you going to do that tax return every time you buy, a case of Coca-Cola with it? All of a sudden that's a transaction on your tax return.
great point.
It's just it's just administratively crazy to deal with. I don't know if that's going to be the future. I know there's a lot of Bitcoin people that are just, evangelists for it. Is there going to be some type of currency that we have now? I can see that in the future. I don't know if Bitcoin's Ethereum and Solana or the rest of that stuff is going to be the future. But it's interesting. I got a little bit of money in crypto. I put $100 in many, many years ago. It's worth a lot more than now, but that's all I did just for kicks and giggles.
Yeah, I guess whenever you have it there, like you said, it's not until it becomes cash again, you really don't have to worry. Just let it sit. And some people call it an investment, some people don't because of how speculative it is. So yeah, I think it's
Well,
just
the way I
it
look
could be
at
an
it,
accounting nightmare.
it's a glorified Beanie Baby. If you remember Beanie Babies,
Oh
where people
yeah,
would
of
buy
course.
Beanie Babies and then they were supposed to go up in value and back down again. But let's just face it, crypto is only worth what someone behind you is willing to pay for it. That's really what, and people say, well, that's the same thing with stock. Well, the difference with stock is that in stock, if I go to Walmart and I buy stock in Walmart, if Walmart decides to go out of business, I'm at least probably gonna get my money back more than likely because there's some shelves, there's some inventory, some trucks, there's some there's a lot of stuff that can be sold off in order to pay me back. Crypto, nothing.
Yeah.
It's just whatever someone behind you is willing to pay for it, which causes a problem because you got to be the first person in line, not the last person in line.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
I could talk to you for hours and hours about this, but if there's any bullet point list that you would provide to our listeners or viewers when it comes to preparing accordingly so you don't end up as a defense attorney in a criminal investigation tax wise, what would you say to them? What is one way to either to stay out of this this world? I mean, obviously keeping your books clean, paying your taxes, all that. Anything else? And then the other part of it is, if this does happen to you, how do you prepare accordingly? Finding a tax attorney who's done this before. What's the remedy?
Well, in order to stay out of criminal investigation, criminal tax investigation, the answer is just pay your taxes. Just do the right thing. If it's a mistake or you have to estimate, that's fine. You know, what the IRS is really looking for is the individuals who just, you know, given the IRS the middle finger saying, I'm not going to pay tax whatsoever, come find me. That's a different story altogether. And you deserve to be prosecuted for that because we all have to pay, whether we like it, our share, whether we like it, or not. We live in this country, we got to pay taxes. I may not like the tax code, but it is what it is. I can't make up the rules. So the easiest way to do is number one is when you get a return preparer, just tell them what you got and find a decent one. If someone is your return preparer, have them review it with you over a minute or so to make sure that's reasonable. Don't have them put it, because I've seen this with two return preparers. They'll put garbage on there and then you sign it, and then you find out you get a large refund because you're like, whoo, this guy's smart. He got me a large refund, but they don't find out later on that, frankly, he put bogus information on it to get you a large refund, and typically he wants the money back as a percentage. Don't go after those people. They're not legitimate. So those are the good things. If you find yourself in a potentially a criminal tax investigation, and small business owners and entrepreneurs can be in this situation pretty easy with unpaid payroll taxes. And we didn't go into this subject, but unpaid payroll taxes is a huge issue with small business owners.
You wrote a book about this too,
I
right?
wrote a book about
Specifically.
unpaid payroll taxes. It is a crime not to turn over the money that was withheld out of people's paychecks. People don't understand that. It's a felony not to turn it over. So once you take it, the government considers it an embezzlement of their money if you don't take that money and give it to them on time. It's a crime, and it's very easy to prove. Anyways, the point being is, um, if you ever find yourself in a criminal tax investigation or someone with badges knocking on your door, just tell them, talk to my attorney, go find an attorney, and have your attorney hire me. So we can take a look at it to see whether or not we can either mitigate the damage or get you out of it or whatever else it is. We'll at least do the best we can to get you a good representation.
And that website, guys,
I can't change. Yeah, go ahead.
that website is nordlandercpa.com or robertnordlander.com. Am I right? Those two, they go to the
There you
same
go.
spot?
That's right. Yep,
Okay.
and they can go on Amazon and get the book and read the books too. My books are on Amazon as well.
So yeah, and so if they do find themselves in hot water, reach out to you. He's easily to find on LinkedIn. But last question I have for you: you brought up Hunter Biden in the beginning, and it comes down to
Hmm.
his hookers being a business expense, and maybe his art being worth $500,000. Were you a part of any of that? Did you hear anything about it? If not, maybe that's just hearsay. But last question, I guess, is I've noticed that very rich people get into the art world probably because it's very subjective. What's it worth? Well, whatever somebody's willing to pay for it, right? So it's another way to hide funds. I think that might be another red flag. But anything you could say on both those topics at all?
Well, I was not part of the Hunter Biden investigation, so I know nothing about this other than what I read in the papers. Just to let people know, because I'm not allowed to discuss things that I do know. So I can only say what I see in the papers. No, you can't deduct stuff that's personal in nature and describe it as a business expense. So hookers, whether it's going out to Vegas and gambling, whether you're going to, where you're buying a bunch of clothes, you buy a Ferrari and claim as a medical, as a medical equipment depreciation, whatever else it is, it's still all the same thing. It's still tax evasion or filing a false tax return, which is a felony. No, you can't do that type of thing. That's not how it works. So,
Got it.
um,
And then
it,
art
it,
itself is
in art, see, Mike, we can have a whole different discussion on money laundering and everything else, but art, you're right. Art can be used as money laundering because it's very subjective. How do I know this art piece is worth, $500,000 worth is $5, right? And if I want to give money, and NFTs are the same way.
oh,
How in the
great
world?
point.
Oh, this
Yes.
whole thing about NFTs. if I'm going to send money from point A to point B and I'm in an illegal drug business or some type of illegal business, all I got to do is say, here, let me buy this piece of art for $500,000. Here's your $500,000, and it's really drug proceeds. I'm just giving the money back to the drug dealer. There's a huge mess out regarding art, but yes, it is out there using art as money laundering, or at least a venue for money laundering.
Hmm.
But that's a different podcast altogether. We
Yeah.
could talk about this stuff all day long, dude. We could.
Yeah. Speaking of which, your podcast, Fraud Fighter Podcast, seems like you share this wisdom all the time. So if they check it out on Spotify or iTunes, you have a podcast on this, right?
I do. It's really for the forensic accounting nerds, those who are interested in how accounting is used in court. That's really all it is. And I interview people that are subject matter experts. I started the podcast for a couple reasons. Number one is I want to know who's writing out the checks, who is doing the work, what tools are being used. That's what I wanted to know. And so I just interviewed people, defense attorneys, bankruptcy attorneys, investigators, lawyers, software people, and we just nerd out on, accounting and the court systems, that type of stuff. So yeah, they're just subject matter experts uh, that are in this world. It's a very small niche. It is what it is. It's not. If you're into stuff that's not like that, you'd be like completely bored. My daughter would be completely bored over it because she's not into accounting. But some people are.
Man, I'm blown away by this type of stuff because I don't know, nobody really talks about it. You're the first person. I've had 250 episodes. You're the first person that have seen that side of the world. So I appreciate you coming on, guys. The book is called Criminal Tax Secrets: What Every Defense Attorney Should Know, an insider's guide to evaluating every stage of a criminal tax investigation. He has another book called Unpaid Payroll Taxes. And I believe that one came out in 2023. It's a time bomb you can defuse. 7 actions to stop a financial catastrophe and possible imprisonment before it's too late. So, Robert Nordlander, I really appreciate you coming on. And when this new book comes out, I believe you have one that's about to hit the shelves here within the year. When that comes out, please hit us up. We'd love to have you back on.
It's at an editor right now, so hopefully it'll be out there for us, the accounting nerds out there. But if you're an entrepreneur, unpaid payroll taxes, I would highly recommend you buy that thing because that will solve you a lot of problems and
Beautiful.
potential problems in the future. So get that.
Yeah, it looks like you put
Thank
out
you,
a
Mike.
book every year, and you know the power of a book. It's ultimately changed your identity. It's helped you get out there. So, guys, no matter what industry you're in, write a book. It'll change your life. So, Robert, thanks so much for being here, man.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.